Welcome back, history buffs and maritime enthusiasts, to another episode. I am your host, Hari, and I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us today. We are going to be diving deep, literally and figuratively, into a fantastic piece of naval history.
And I am Kimmy. Hello, everyone. Hari, looking at today's topic, I have to say I am feeling a little claustrophobic already. We are talking about the Yugoslav submarine Mališan, a tiny vessel with a surprisingly massive footprint on history.
You are not wrong about the claustrophobia. We're talking about a vessel that packed 4 grown men into a 15-meter tube, basically a crew of 4 in a space the size of a modern studio apartment, but with zero natural light and a lot more explosives.
I know the real estate market is tough, but living underwater in an uninsulated steel tube takes tiny home living to a whole new, terrifying level. And get this, there was only one bunk installed for the entire crew. You just had to rotate who got to sleep. The expected human endurance at sea was a mere 2 days.
Exactly. To properly understand this incredible machine, we need to go back to its origins. It was laid down in 1943 by the Caproni Company in Milan. Now, for the aviation geeks out there, Caproni is famously known as an aircraft manufacturer. But during World War II, the Regia Marina, or Royal Navy, contracted them to build these CB-class midget submarines for harbor defense and anti-submarine warfare.
It is quite fascinating that an aircraft company built submarines. It really highlights how wartime industries had to pivot. This specific sub started its life designated as CB-20. The design was heavily focused on stealth and coastal operations. It had a really squat hull shape and a non-structural lateral double bottom along 2/3 of the hull.
The engineering compromises are quite interesting. The pressure hull had the control room forward and the engine room aft. But the bulkhead between them wasn't even watertight. It was just a light transverse bulkhead designed strictly to muffle the deafening engine noise so the crew in the control room could actually hear each other.
And even the materials used were highly questionable. According to naval historian Zvonimir Freivogel, the steel used for the outer light hull was of poor quality and incredibly prone to rust. But what it lacked in material quality, it made up for in quirky utility. For instance, the submarine had a straight keel so it could be easily transported by road and rail, plus 2 side keels that allowed the boat to literally rest on the sea bottom while silently waiting in ambush for an enemy target.
That ambush tactic was crucial because its offensive capabilities were, let's say, very limited. The main armament was just 2 450mm external torpedo tubes on the sides of the hull. But here is the kicker. Reloading those tubes at sea was a logistical nightmare. They couldn't do it alone. The launching cylinders at the rear of the tubes had to be completely removed to insert a fresh torpedo, so they only ever carried 2 torpedoes total.
Some sources even mention they could swap those torpedoes for 2 naval mines instead. And defensively, they just had a single machine gun mounted on a tripod on the foredeck. So it definitely wasn't a vessel meant for prolonged, aggressive naval combat. It was a stealthy scout and harbor sentinel.
Right. Moving this little 45-ton boat underwater was an Azota Fraschini diesel engine paired with a Morelli electric motor. The electric motor ran off 308 batteries stuffed under the control room. It maxed out at 7.5 knots on the surface and just 6 knots submerged. To give our listeners some scale, 6 knots underwater is roughly a fast jogging pace.
I love the idea of a submarine desperately trying to speed away at the pace of a morning jog. But let's dive into its incredibly turbulent service history. CB-20 was about 60% completed when Italy surrendered to the Allies on September 3, 1943. Instead of seeing Italian service right away, the unfinished boat was captured by the Germans.
The Germans had Caproni finish the construction by March 1944. They intended to use it for coastal reconnaissance, but they ended up handing it over to the Navy of the Italian Social Republic. That was the wartime German puppet state established under Benito Mussolini in northern Italy.
It was then attached to a flotilla known as the Decima Flotilla MAS, specifically performing reconnaissance and dropping off saboteurs. But the war was rapidly turning against the Axis powers. By late 1944, the sub was relocated to the naval base at Pola, which is modern-day Pula in Croatia. And this is where things take a rather dark and dramatic turn.
Yes, some sources state that on May 2, 1945, the Yugoslav Army, formerly the Partisans, captured Pola, although other accounts indicate the battle for the city did not officially end until May 5th. The submarine's original crew realized the port was falling and attempted a desperate escape. Unfortunately, the entrance to the harbor had been heavily mined with German magnetic mines. The submarine sustained damage from those mines, forcing the crew to turn back and surrender. It is a grim reality of war. After surrendering alongside other members of their flotilla, the crew was later executed by the Yugoslav army. It is a sobering reminder of the brutal end-of-war conditions in that region. But for the submarine itself, a completely new chapter was just beginning.
Indeed, the Yugoslav Navy officially took possession of the battered little sub and towed it into the Uljanik shipyard at Pula. They repaired and overhauled it, cannibalizing spare parts from other damaged CB-class boats lying around. They also gave it a new name, Mališan, which roughly translates to nipper or little boy, and assigned it the pennant number P901.
They even drew up detailed blueprints of the Mališan during the repair phase, possibly thinking about building a whole fleet of these midget submarines. Though, funnily enough, that plan was completely shelved, and they didn't actually build their own midget subs until the Una class came along in the 1980s.
By 1953, Mališan was formally commissioned into the Yugoslav Navy. Its primary role was training. It helped train new submariners, but more amusingly, it was used to train patrol boat crews in anti-submarine warfare. And there is a brilliant, slightly comical detail about this training.
Oh, I know exactly what you were going to say. The Mališan was so incredibly small and quiet that the surface patrol boats literally could not find it. The entire point of a submarine is to stay hidden, but to actually facilitate the training exercises, the crew of the Mališan had to intentionally release trails of air bubbles just so the surface ships knew where they were.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine being a proud submariner and your commander orders you to blow bubbles so the surface rookies can find you. It is such a delightful contradiction. They also used the boat for public relations, occasionally bringing senior Army and Navy officers aboard just to show off the technology.
And we can't forget its role in the cult of personalities surrounding Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito. During the annual Relay of Youth event, the Mališan actually carried a birthday message for Tito entirely underwater across the Bay of Pula. Talk about an over-the-top way to deliver a birthday card.
It definitely beats standard postage. Despite these fun peacetime activities, keeping the Mališan running became a mechanical nightmare. Decades of wear plus that famously poor quality Italian steel meant maintenance was an endless struggle. It was finally stricken from the Navy list on September 30, 1957.
But that wasn't the end of its life. 2 years later, in October 1959, the boat was donated to the Technical Museum in Zagreb. Transporting it was an adventure in itself. They had to completely remove the conning tower just so it would fit on the rail cars, and the final leg of the journey through the city streets of Zagreb was done using a heavy tank transporter.
It sat there on display for almost 50 years, giving generations of visitors a glimpse into naval history. However, by 2007, the museum realized the Mališan was deteriorating badly. So in 2008, reportedly, a massive collaborative restoration effort began, involving the museum, the Maritime Institute, the University of Zagreb, and private contractors.
The restoration was incredibly meticulous. They actually had to build a custom crane just to reach inside the submarine and extract the electric motor and compressor, both of which weighed over 100 kilograms. They completely dismantled the torpedo tubes and the tail section to stop the corrosion.
When they finished the exterior in 2010, they raised the boat by 80 centimeters on new supports. This was a brilliant move because it allowed museum visitors to safely climb down through an original hatch and actually stand inside the cramped pressure hole, experiencing that claustrophobia we joked about earlier firsthand.
But, Hari, we have to talk about the controversy. During this restoration, the museum made the executive decision to revert the submarine back to its original World War II Italian paint scheme and designation, displaying it as CB-20 instead of the Yugoslav Mališan.
Yes, that ruffled quite a few feathers, particularly with Croatian defense journalist Boris Švel. The Technical Museum argued unofficially that the Italian configuration had greater historical relevance and a more reliably documented history, but Švel pointed out a massive flaw in that logic.
Right. He pointed out that the Italian Royal Navy had over 20 of these CB-class submarines in service. They were relatively common in that specific historical context, but Yugoslavia? Yugoslavia only ever had one. The Mališan was entirely unique in its Yugoslav configuration.
Exactly. To further Švel's point, a sister ship, often cited as the CB-26, though the museum itself identifies it as the CB-22, already exists in a museum in Trieste, Italy. Although, ironically, reports indicate that the presumed CB-26 was restored very poorly and its interior was left in complete disrepair. The Mališan, on the other hand, is practically pristine inside now.
Švel really advocated for expanding the museum's information boards to better highlight its Yugoslav service. It is a classic museum dilemma. Which era of a heavily reused artifact's life do you choose to preserve? Do you honor its original creation or the era where it had the most unique cultural impact?
It is a fantastic debate for historians, but regardless of what name is painted on the side, CB-20 or Mališan, it remains a phenomenal survival story. A tiny, poorly built sub that outlived empires, survived magnetic mines, helped train a generation of sailors by blowing bubbles, and now rests safely as an interactive time capsule.
I couldn't have summarized it better myself. It really is the little submarine that could. Thank you all so much for joining us on this fascinating journey through maritime history. We hope you learned something new today.
Absolutely. We love uncovering these hidden gems of history for you. Take care, stay curious, and we will catch you in the next episode for another great story.
This episode is based on the Wikipedia article Yugoslav Submarine Mališan, which is available under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. This podcast was crafted using artificial intelligence.